David Davis, who hopefully joins me now. He's the Tory MP for Halton, Price and Howden, former Brexit Secretary. David, good morning. Lots more stories about Tory infighting in today's papers. We've now got claims that Oliver Dowden may have been involved in referring Boris Johnson to the police, this idea that ministers may have been involved as well as the Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Office. What's the deal with this story? Is it a witch hunt of Boris Johnson? I know you're not a fan, but do we really need another investigation into Partygate, David?
Well, to be honest, I was a bit surprised by it. As you know, I have strong views on Boris, but he's effectively on trial at the moment. He's on trial for his career, if you like, with the Privileges Committee looking at all the allegations and whether or not he told the truth to Parliament. Now, if you go on trial, halfway through the trial, somebody can't come in and say, oh, by the way, can we add shoplifting to the burglary? Can we add all these other charges or this other evidence? And so I do think this was a bit of a misjudgment, whether it's Oliver or whether it's simply the lawyers on the investigation team for Baroness Hallett's inquiry. I don't know, but it just seemed to me not appropriate, frankly. We've got to come to a resolution on Boris. The key issue is about Partygate in number 10 and how he described that, how honest he was about it. That's the key issue. Chequers, frankly, is neither here nor there, and it just adds. I mean, I don't agree with the sort of Boris supporters who say this is a terrible plot. I just think it's, frankly, a slightly incompetent way of handling the data.
Although there's more evidence perhaps for some kind of plot being afoot against the former Prime Minister, because there's now a question mark over his honours list. I think Lord McFall, the Lord's Speaker, said in the week that he had concerns about Prime Ministerial resignation honours. Should Boris Johnson be allowed to honour and ennoble the people he wants, or should that be looked at, David?
Well, look, we are still halfway through, as I said, this trial. I know it's not over yet, and when we come to the conclusion, let's see what the Privileges Committee decide. If they decide that he is guilty of a major misdemeanour and they penalise him accordingly, then maybe we have to think twice about honours. I happen to think, by the way, that we are altogether too fast to allow resignation honours for Prime Ministers. I mean, you had Liz Truss in place for almost weeks anyway, not almost days, I was going to say. Is it appropriate? She has an honours list. I mean, I actually have a lot of sympathy with it. Well, I have a lot of sympathy with McFall. I think resignation honours lists are a bad idea, full stop. They lead to a feeling, whether it's true or not, they lead to a feeling that people are just paying off their friends.
Or their relatives.
Reward.
Or their relatives, David. What do you think about Stanley Johnson maybe being honoured by his own son?
Well, that would be inappropriate in my view. You've got to have at least some reason for the honour. I mean, sometimes the reason is charitable work, sometimes it's other things. It's in modern times, it's become rather too common for party funders and the like to get honour. So my view is that we need to streamline it. We need to reduce the size of the Lords anyway, basically to halve it. And we won't do that if we keep sending along people who are friends of the Prime Minister.
If you halve the Lords, David, that might stop your chances of becoming ennobled in future years.
I suspect I'm going to die in harness in the Commons, actually.
Now, we were talking about just a quick yes-no answer. Should ITV launch an investigation into Schofield? Yes or no, David? And we'll move on.
No.
No? OK, fine. Let's move on to the economy. We've had an interesting statement from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, in the week, basically saying that he would rather we went into recession to bring inflation down than have inflation continue to creep up. Isn't that just managed declinism? What's the Chancellor talking about here? Do you agree with this?
No, the reverse. I mean, look, if inflation took off, it would undermine the basis of growth. It would cut people's incomes. Cost of living would basically drive their effective income down. I'm old enough, I'm afraid, to remember the last time we had very high levels of inflation, and it's incredibly corrosive. It destroys growth by itself. So he's right, he's got to fix that first. I mean, I wouldn't quite have put it in those terms, one's worth the other. I would have just said you've got to fix one before you get the other. You've got to fix inflation before you get sustainable growth.
Have you got concerns about the Bank of England's behaviour in all this? I know during the week you've been speaking out about LIBOR. You're suggesting that perhaps Parliament might have been misled by the Bank of England over the fixing of interest rates back in the early noughties. What's gone on here? Do you think that Andrew Bailey has been asleep at the wheel?
Well, no, I mean, that's a long while ago. I mean, it's pre-Bailey times, that particular concern, and it's very specific about miscarriage of justice. But I do think there is an issue of the sheer amount of money that the bank has pumped into the economy. They call it QE, which is basically essentially printing money to buy government bonds. But what it does is it pushes what they call core inflation, the underlying inflation. We are doing okay on energy costs. We're doing okay, and not good enough on bringing the inflation level in sort of groceries down. But the core inflation is still going up, worse for us than most other countries. That's at the door of the bank. That is right at the door of the bank, and the bank has got to account for it. Because if you keep printing money, we know what happens. We end up with never-ending inflation. That destroys everything.
You talked about groceries there. What do you make of Rishi Sunak's intervention on food, suggesting that the supermarket should cap the price of basic goods? I mean, this is a bit like a kind of Soviet Union policy, isn't it? Should the Conservatives be intervening on supermarket prices, David?
Well, it's a bit more like a French policy, but he actually does have an economic point. The what's happening is that the raw material prices are coming down, and they're not making their way through the food chain, if you like, fast enough. So if I were Sunak, I'd be making Tesco's and Sainsbury's and whoever explain why their pricing is as high as it is now. They should be able to bring the pricing down quite quickly. I mean, it's the trouble. Look, if you run a business, you're going to be quick to increase your prices when your costs go up. You're not going to be quite so quick to reduce them when they go down. And the government is doing the right thing, putting pressure on them. I think, actually, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I hate the idea of price controls. I've lived through them too. They're a disaster. And I hope that's not what he's talking about. What he'll be talking about is get on with getting the prices in line with your raw material costs.
And what about the 606,000 migration figure, David? Does that need to come down? Do you think the government should set a cap on migrants coming into the UK?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has to come down. Your comments from Alexander Downer earlier were absolutely on the nail. You know, there are some special things. There's Hong Kong and there's Ukraine and so on. But there are things in there which are just bonkers. I mean, frankly, students should not be bringing their families here at all unless they're coming to stay forever. I mean, look, if you want to come and study for a PhD in the UK, even then I would think twice about allowing families to come. Quite a lot of universities now are actually employing people to advertise taking degrees in the UK as a way to bring your family. This is happening in India. We've seen some of these examples. And that's just wrong. And the Home Office should have had a grip of this some time ago. By the same measure, you should also be a bit tough on the Treasury. I mean, the Treasury, look, Gordon Brown started this habit of increasing immigration in order to artificially push up the growth rate. Downer was right. It's the growth rate per capita, the GDP per capita that matters. And if the only way you're pushing up the growth rate is by bringing people in, you're storing up problems for the future. And of course, storing up problems for today with housing and so on. So both sides, Treasury and Home Office, need to get their act together. Both of them are deluding themselves. Both of them are not doing a proper professional job. And they need to get a grip on it.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but it's been lovely to hear from you.